In a landmark decision that will be studied for generations, the Supreme Court has struck down the Trump-era tariffs, fundamentally reshaping U.S. trade policy overnight and sending ripples through every corner of the global marketplace. The ruling dismantles years of protectionist measures, sending shockwaves through the global economy and altering not only the price of goods, but also the stability and predictability of supply chains that businesses and consumers rely on. For American businesses, this is a long-awaited turning point, one that could redefine their financial outlook, open new opportunities for growth, and force a rethinking of long-term strategies. At its core, the case was about the limits of presidential power. Could a president impose sweeping tariffs under the guise of national security, without Congress? The court's answer was a resounding no, restoring a crucial check on executive authority. The justices agreed that the executive branch had overstepped, setting a powerful precedent for future administrations and clarifying the boundaries of presidential action. The tariffs, originally meant to protect U.S. industries, instead triggered a global trade war, raising costs for manufacturers and families alike, and straining relationships with key allies. Today's decision ends that chapter, forcing a national rethink of how America engages with its trading partners, and how it balances domestic interests with global responsibilities. The economic and political fallout will be debated for years, but one thing is clear: this is a pivotal moment in American history, marking a dramatic shift in the nation's approach to global commerce. The ruling directly addresses the balance of power between the branches of government, reaffirming Congress's constitutional authority and its vital role in shaping trade policy. As the dust settles, policymakers and business leaders are left to answer a pressing question: what comes next, and how will America adapt to this new reality? The future of American trade policy, and its global role, hangs in the balance, with every decision now carrying even greater weight. The world is watching closely as the U.S. redefines its economic strategy, aware that these changes will have far-reaching consequences. The implications of this decision will shape the global order for years to come, influencing not just trade, but the very nature of international cooperation and competition. The legal battle against the tariffs centered on a core constitutional question: did the president overreach the powers granted by the Constitution, or was this a necessary use of executive authority in a time of economic uncertainty? Thousands of companies, from small manufacturers to global giants, argued that the administration abused Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act, stretching the definition of national security far beyond its original intent. For many, this was not just a legal issue, but a matter of survival, as the tariffs threatened jobs, investments, and the stability of entire industries. Plaintiffs claimed the law was used as a cover for economic protectionism, a power that, according to the Constitution, is reserved for Congress. They insisted that bypassing Congress undermined the checks and balances at the heart of American democracy. The administration also invoked the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, to justify tariffs on China. However, critics argued this law was never meant for broad trade actions, but rather for genuine emergencies threatening national security, not routine economic disputes. The Supreme Court was asked to clarify the limits of these laws and whether the president could act without clear congressional approval. The stakes were high, as the outcome would set a precedent for future administrations. Beyond ending the tariffs, companies demanded reimbursement for billions paid under the policy, raising major fiscal questions for the government. The potential refunds could impact federal budgets and future trade negotiations. The case became a test of the separation of powers. Congress, not the president, holds the authority to regulate commerce and impose tariffs. Lawmakers from both parties watched closely, aware that the decision could redefine their own influence over trade. The lawsuits argued that unilateral executive action disrupted the constitutional balance, setting a dangerous precedent for future leaders to bypass legislative oversight. The court's decision draws a clear line. Presidential authority in trade is not unlimited. The ruling emphasized that the executive branch must respect the boundaries set by law. This ruling reasserts Congress's role and sets a new standard for how trade policy is made, ensuring that major economic decisions are subject to public debate and legislative scrutiny. The outcome will shape the boundaries of executive power for years to come, influencing not only trade, but also the broader relationship between the branches of government. The message is clear. Major trade decisions require legislative backing, and the days of unchecked executive action are behind us. The era of unchecked executive tariffs is over. marking a new chapter in the balance of power and the future of American trade policy. The impact of tariffs was far from uniform. While they provided a boost to certain sectors, they also brought significant challenges and hardships to many others across the economy. Steel and aluminum industries experienced short-term gains, with increased production and some job growth. However, manufacturers dependent on imported materials faced rapidly rising costs, which they often had no choice but to pass on to consumers in the form of higher prices for everyday goods. Small and medium-sized businesses already operating on thin margins struggled to absorb these new expenses. As a result, profits shrank, hiring slowed, and some businesses were forced to close their doors altogether. Retaliatory tariffs from China, Canada, and the EU struck U.S. agriculture especially hard, closing off vital export markets and forcing many farmers to rely on government aid just to stay afloat. The resulting trade uncertainty stifled investment and slowed economic growth, particularly in regions heavily dependent on exports and global trade. While some argued that tariffs were necessary to counter unfair foreign practices, most economic data pointed to higher prices for consumers and widespread supply chain disruptions that outweighed any short-term benefits. For every steel mill that saw a revival, there was a manufacturer or farmer somewhere else facing new and often severe hardships, highlighting the trade-offs inherent in such policies. The Supreme Court's recent decision doesn't erase this complex history, but it does signal a shift away from the era of aggressive protectionism and toward a new approach. Now, both businesses and consumers must adapt to a new economic reality, one shaped by the lessons and consequences of the tariff era. The debate over the right balance between protection and open markets continues, but the policy landscape has undeniably changed, prompting new conversations about America's role in global trade. As the country moves forward, it does so with a deeper understanding, learning from both the costs and the consequences of the tariff era, and striving to build a more resilient and balanced economy for the future. The Supreme Court's 6-3 decision declared the executive branch had overstepped by imposing broad tariffs. Chief Justice Roberts wrote that Congress, not the President, holds the power to regulate foreign commerce and levy tariffs. The court warned that loose interpretations of national security could upend the balance of power. The ruling clarified that emergency powers like IEPA are for targeted crises, not long-term trade management. This sets a new precedent, limiting future presidents' use of emergency declarations in trade. The verdict is a constitutional course correction, reinforcing Congress's authority. The decision's impact on executive power will echo for generations. The business world cheered the Supreme Court's decision. Industries dependent on imports, manufacturing, retail, tech, welcomed lower costs and more stable supply chains. Stock markets surged, especially in sectors hit hardest by the tariffs. Investors saw the ruling as a boost for corporate earnings and economic growth. But not everyone celebrated steel and aluminum producers, once shielded by tariffs, now face tough competition and fear job losses. Labor unions echoed these concerns, warning of setbacks for American industry. The split reaction highlights the deep divisions in U.S. trade policy. Policymakers now face the challenge of supporting vulnerable sectors while embracing the benefits of open trade. The government must balance relief for some with new risks for others. The transition will test America's economic resilience. With the tariffs struck down, the administration is moving to unwind the old system. Federal agencies are coordinating to halt tariff collections and address the complex issue of refunding billions already paid. The White House must now craft a new trade policy, one that respects constitutional limits and relies on negotiation, not unilateral action. Expect a return to traditional diplomacy, WTO complaints, bilateral talks, and targeted legal tools. Congress is under pressure to clarify trade laws and set clear boundaries for presidential authority. Bipartisan efforts are underway to update statutes and prevent future overreach. This moment marks a pivot in U.S. trade strategy toward collaboration and oversight. The administration must balance unwinding tariffs with building a new cooperative approach. The future of trade will depend on closer executive-legislative cooperation. The Supreme Court's ruling has set the stage for a new era in American trade policy. America's trading partners welcome the Supreme Court's decision. China, the EU, Canada, and Mexico see it as a chance to reset relations and remove retaliatory tariffs. The ruling is expected to restore predictability and efficiency to global supply chains. International organizations hope this will reinforce the rules-based trading system. Yet core disputes, like intellectual property and market access, remain unresolved. The US and its partners must now address these issues through negotiation, not trade wars. The decision signals a renewed US commitment to multilateralism. Global leaders hope for a more stable, cooperative economic future. The world is ready to move beyond trade conflict and rebuild trust. The Supreme Court's ruling reshapes the balance of power between President and Congress. By curbing unilateral tariffs, it reaffirms Congress's central role in trade. Future presidents will need legislative approval for major trade moves, leading to more debate and durable policies. The decision may prompt Congress to modernize trade laws and clarify executive authority. This is a pivotal check on the growth of presidential power in economic policy. The ruling doesn't weaken the presidency, it clarifies its limits. Major trade decisions will now require broader political support. This rebalancing will shape US trade for generations. The Supreme Court's decision marks a turning point for US trade. The end of protectionist tariffs brings relief to many, but new challenges for some industries. The ruling reasserts Congress's authority and signals a shift toward negotiation and collaboration. The administration must now dismantle the tariff system and craft a new approach. Congress faces pressure to update trade laws and prevent future conflicts. The economic transition will be complex, with winners and losers. The decision checks executive power and sets a new precedent for trade policy. America moves away from economic nationalism toward rules-based global trade. The world is watching as the US navigates this new landscape. The next chapter in American trade begins now.